run some stories by us. And I think the best place to start is to go backwards. So if we could start with your mom, with Laura Margaret Connolly Pitts, who was from Middletown originally. And so let's start off in Middletown. Where where was your mother born?
She was born in Middletown, Delaware, and her mother was Alice Cochran Conley, Alice Ford Cochran Conley,
Mm-hmm.
and her dad was William Thornton Conley. That was my grandmother and grandfather. And my mother was a very bright person. She was very well educated, and in her life in Middletown, she would always tell me the stories of her mother and father, which were very interesting, which would be your great grandfather and grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
And they were a really fine family. Your grandfather started out in Cochrane Square, as it's named today, with a grocery store. And in order to promote his grocery store, he would go around with a push cart and take orders from everyone in the town and then deliver the orders. And that way he built up a trade, and they found out how good his quality of his goods was. And he had the real old-fashioned store where the bananas hung upside down in the windows, and they had the all the big barrels of flour, barrels of sugar, and just a totally old-fashioned country store. Beautiful. And he had a candy case in the front there for everybody, and it was really a fine, fine store. And he used to help poor people when they didn't have enough money to pay. Grandpa always took care of people. And he and my grandmother used to give coal to the families in the town that didn't have enough coal to keep warm. They would give them things that they could use, like coal and food. And they were always there for people. They were a very fine family. My grandmother came from a family of 10. Her mother was Sarah O. Shallcross, who married John A. Cochran, and that's where the sampler comes in. When my grandmother's mother, that's Alice Ford Cochran's mother, Sarah O. Shallcross.
My great-great-grandmother.
That's your great-great-grandmother. Well, she made the sampler when she was 12 years old in 1835, I think it is.
Right.
And she was a wonderful person, and obviously very talented to do that at that young age. She was only 12. And she had, you can look at the two birds, they're looking at each other. Now actually the sampler was made for one of the birds to have his head tucked under his wing. And if you look at that sampler long enough, you can see where the pattern should have had the bird's head turned under his wing. But she thought, because they were lovebirds, they should be looking at each other. So at 12 years old, she changed the pattern and had the two birds looking at each other. And that's the story of that sampler, which stayed out there. When she married John A. Cochran, they moved to a farm outside of Middletown, and it was a big, big farm and a beautiful place, and they had 10 children, and my grandmother was the youngest of the 10. Now, Sarah O. Shallcross Cochran died when she was 57 years old from gallbladder trouble, because in those days they didn't have any way to operate. And she was very sad. When she died, she said, "Who's going to take care of my children?" And before she died, they lost I think she was 16 years old, the sister of my grandmother, and their daughter, of course, Maggie. And Maggie died of appendicitis, and it just broke everybody's heart in the family. My grandmother always talked about Maggie.
She died at a very young age, didn't she?
Very young, yes. And my grandmother always talked about her and how she loved her, and they never really got over that. And it was a lovely family. They used to have be tutored in the family by teachers coming to the house, and they had their regular school in their own house, which was done in the old days. And they did beautiful
Yeah, the private tutors.
Yeah, they did beautiful paintings and all kinds of crafts, and they had their own newspaper. they had the Cochrane newsletter, and it was very interesting to see all those old things.
Okay, let's get back to Middletown again, and I just want to hear some of the stories about what happened when you were a youngster there.
Well, we spent all of our summers there with my grandmother, grandfather. And when we moved up from Virginia, we had to spend a year there while my father found a place for us to live in New Jersey. So I went to school, and it was in the first grade, and it was over the Everett Theater, a little theater in Middletown, Delaware. And I wasn't particularly fond of it because it was kind of darkish and not very pleasant. But then I had just moved up from Virginia, and we were a little upset then. Later years, as I lived there in the summers and spent a lot of time with my grandfather, after he retired from the grocery store, he owned a tobacco store. And in that tobacco store, he had a little office in the back part of the store with a pot-bellied stove and old-fashioned chairs, swivel chairs that you could sit in. And I used to go spend the day sometimes sitting in there with Grandpa talking, and he'd let me see the books, and he sold magazines, books, tobacco, and candy. And every day that I was there in the summer, I'd go see him, and he'd take me out and get me an ice cream cone. So I thought that was pretty good. He was a very fine man, very gentle with all of us children. And my grandmother she had an old-fashioned kerosene stove in the kitchen. And I used to put a little oven on top of the stove and cook cakes in it. I guess nobody would really want to do that. It's very tricky to cook a cake that way. But I learned how to do it, and she had me make cakes for all the carnivals that came through town. That was her donation to the carnivals, was somebody could win a cake by spinning a wheel. And so I was very busy making those cakes when I was young.
Also, at what point did you start going to Rehoboth?
Well, my mother took us down to Rehoboth when she could. We went mostly to Chesapeake Bay to swim.
Mm-hmm.
But a real treat was to go to Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, and my mother would make big tins of sandwiches. She would take my brother and my two cousins, Al and Billy, and myself, and we'd go down to the beach and spend the day there and just have the most marvelous time. My mother was very good to us to let us do all those things.
And that's where I guess they would eat at the Wayside Inn too?
Then my grandmother was the one that liked the Wayside Inn. And she just adored to go there. So whenever she could, she had, by the way, the cane that I have here, she had that cane. She walked with it in those days. And I can see her walking with her cane into the Wayside Inn and taking all the family with her in that old hickory cane. If I ever did it, I think I'd be using it too. But then in the Wayside Inn, they had the most delicious crab cakes you'd ever taste.
Yeah, Sue and I love it there.
And they had the rolls and the special little rolls that they make.
It's the same. The food is, I imagine it's the same.
It is. I was there once coming up with Daddy from Rehoboth on one of our trips, and it was the same.
Mm-hmm.
Just delicious out of sight.
It was the same as when the first time you took Kathy and I down there around, I think 1968 or even earlier.
Family tradition.
Yeah, Sue and I, we still go there. We keep it up.
Go to the
With pleasure.
They keep it nice, and thank heavens they keep the menu the same, because you couldn't improve
And it's still very inexpensive. It is.
It doesn't cost an arm and a leg. And then, what else had to do with my grandmother?
Well, about that story about your mom with that, she was visiting Aunt Claire, right? With the when she lost control of that horse and buggy.
Oh, my grandmother, when my mother and Uncle Al were growing up there in Delaware, my grandmother had a horse and sleigh. They didn't have cars then. So they kept the horse, they called him Ned. They kept him in the, what became later the chicken house, but they had kind of a stall for him in there, and a big sleigh. And she went to see her cousin, Mrs. Hupel, out the road a bit, who had a driveway, circular driveway in her front of her house. So Grandma hooked up Ned to the sleigh, got all blankets and warm and everything, and then she had the little horse whip that you have and the reins, and she went out by sleigh in the snow to see her friends because they could go all over with the snow. So she rode out there, and the horse went in, and Mrs. Huckel came out to say hello to my grandmother, and the horse went right on around the circle. And my grandmother pulled him into the driveway again, and he went right around the circle again. And so my grandmother just waved goodbye to Mrs. Huckel. Horse went straight home.
Right to the barn.
Right into the barn, right into his stall. And my grandmother was furious with him, but it was such a funny story. Because
now,
in those days they used to go out to have tea with each other. Having tea was quite the thing.
Sure, that's socializing.
That's it.
There wasn't TV and radio and...
Sitting on the front porches and telling stories. Cousin Maston, Cousin Will, Cousin Jake, they all lived Cochran. They all lived Shallcross as they were. They all lived out.
And what was our relation to the Moneys? Is there any actual relation, or were they just friends? They were just friends of family, I think, right?
Yes, I really don't know.
Okay. And then the Cochran Grange, that was owned by...
That would be by a
great-grandfather's brother, right?
Right, Cochran, who, by the way, was the governor of Delaware. He would be your great-great-uncle, I guess.
Yeah.
But the Cochran Grange, as you saw, is beautiful, and they had that reunion there one year, and Uncle Jack and I went, and we saw how beautiful the house is restored, and just something like Thomas Edison's.
Yeah. Yeah, it's completely restored. It's nice.
Completely restored. Probably had Edison phonographs in it. I would have passed them.
Sure. They got to a lot of farms.
Yeah.
Now, the pottery there I have underneath the piano, the old pickling jars, or
That's what they were.
Pickling jars, right? Now, was that from your grandfather's store?
No.
Okay, they were just from Delaware then.
They were from your John A. Cochran, Cerro Shallcross's farm.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Back that far.
Wow.
And my grandmother kept them, and she used to make, and I used to help her make spiced peaches, and put them in those jars, and then cover the jars with a cheesecloth to keep it clean, and then you let them sit for a long time in a cool place, and they become these spiced peaches that are such a delicacy you hardly ever hear of them anymore. You hear spiced watermelon maybe, but it would be great just to make spiced peaches once more in this world. It's just, it takes a lot of doing and a lot of wrapping things up in cheesecloth, the cloves and the spices, and putting them down into the jars and putting the hot water over them and scalding them, and then letting them sit for such a long time. They come out very dark and very nice and spicy and sweet. She did that. I did it with her.
Okay, Mom, I want to ask you a couple questions about your childhood in Scottsville. Start off when you were little, as much as you can remember, and then go up to the cottage, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, I was born in a cottage in Scottsville, June 10th, 1922. And while this affair was going on between my mother and me being born and my mother working at it, my grandmother was in the grove behind the cottage, walking up and down, and that grandmother was Alice Ford Cochran Conley, and she was saying, hurry up, I have to have that baby, I want to see her, it's going to be a girl, she's going to be named after me. Well, it came true. My grandmother was real. I am named after her, Alice Cochran Pitts Ferrel, so that I was named after my grandmother, Alice Cochran. And, of course, I was a girl, and that's what she wanted, and that's what she got. My brother had already been born 3 years before me, John L. Pitts III, named after Papa John and my dad, and so it became a family name, tradition to be named that. When I remember playing out in the grove when I was a little girl, and there was a shed in the back, and as all sheds, some mice had a little nest there, and I thought they were so cute, and I wanted to play with them, and my mother and father were up at the cottage, and I was down there playing, and so I picked the little mice up and everything, and all of a sudden, I tried to put them down. They wouldn't let go of me. Their little feet stuck to my hand. So I was only about 4 years old, and I went running to my father and screaming, "They won't turn me loose! They won't turn me loose!" And my dad never forgot the story about that. And then my dad built a chicken house, and he wasn't very good at building anything, and he built this chicken house. And he put all the hens in it and thought that was good, and then he was going to walk up the hill to Belhaven, which was just up the hill from the cottage. And he gets halfway up the hill, and every one of the chickens is following him right up the hill. Wherever he went, they followed him. That's why he made the chicken house, but it didn't work. It was so funny. I just watched him, a little girl, watching her father go up, and all the chickens, go following him up the hill. But then we moved over to the cottage, to Cliffside, and that was a very nice big old house with a lot of ground around it. And I remember Papa John and Mother Helen lived up at Belhaven, and Dorothy and Catherine. I remember Aunt Virginia and
Aunt June, right?
no, June was my
Oh, she was a
cousin.
cousin. That's right.
It was Aunt Hester, and there was Uncle Lindsay married Aunt Hester, and June was their daughter, one of their 5 children, I think. And June was my friend because we were about exactly the same age.
Mm-hmm.
Also with Jimmy Lee, Aunt Claire's the daughter of Papa John.
Was that Jimmy Lee Heath?
Jimmy Lee of Daria.
Oh, Daria. Okay.
Was my age, and we were good friends. They lived at Hilltop, all from Cliffside to Hilltop, Belhaven, in a cottage. And then there was Marion Pitts, and I don't know where he lived, but he was my age, and he was up at Hilltop a lot with Aunt Clara and the boys. So we sort of hung out together. When we got old enough, we played bridge together on the porch at Belhaven. Enough of us to play takes 4. And they used to laugh at me because I was the only girl, and of course they were going to tease me, and they tried to trick me and make me lose at the game and everything. But I did finally learn how to play.
Mm-hmm.
And also when Papa John, when anybody became 6 years old, he gave that grandchild a Shetland pony. So, yeah. So when I was at Cliffside, Papa John gave me my Shetland pony. And it had a white mark down the face of the pony, so I named it Black Beauty. I used to love to ride that pony. And I rode, sometimes the farm hands would come over to talk to Daddy on the front porch of Cliffside, and they would leave their horse over by the fence, and they weren't paying any attention to me, so I just climbed on their horse and was galloping all around Cliffside until Grandpa caught me. My dad caught me and said, "You can't do that, you might fall off." But I had a big time till I got caught.
You rode bareback, right, too?
Yeah,
with the pony?
In the summers, we would ride the horses bareback.
Just hold on to the mane, right?
You hold on with your knees.
Yeah.
And your balance. And you have the reins, and you can't hold on to the mane if but we were really good at it. I mean, we rode around like Indians. June and I and all my other cousins that we could get enough horses for, we just had a big time in the summer doing that. It was fun. We used to make homemade ice cream up at Aunt Clara's at Hilltop, and everybody had to take a turn churning, and because it was the old-fashioned way, and you churned the thing almost all afternoon. But it was the best ice cream I have ever tasted, or ever will. And Aunt Clara used to have big, beautiful parties, and our tables would be maybe out on the porch, and big tables in the house, and everything was so grand. And Belhaven, Mother Helen used to have that entire table pulled out the entire length of the huge dining room, filled with her grandchildren and her, all of her that belonged to her, nieces and nephews and whatever. And everybody and the cooks just piling the food through the little
serving window, yeah.
Pantry thing there. And I always sat next to Mother Helen. She always had me sit next to her, which And if she ever wanted to ride in a car, she'd ask me to drive her. She said I was careful. And my cousin June used to say, get mad at me. He'd say, you don't drive any better than I do. I said, I know, but she thinks I do. I had wonderful times with my cousin June. She was the one who had the horses on her father's farm, Uncle Lindsay, and Aunt Hester. And then there was Nancy, Buddy, and Nora, all in that family.
What about my grandfather, your dad?
Well, when we lived in Scottsville, my dad was a Methodist, and my mother was an Episcopalian, and they both taught Sunday school. So my brother was baptized Episcopalian, so in order to be fair, I was baptized a Methodist. But I went to the Episcopal Sunday school with my mom, and she played the organ there too. And Grandpa had owned a mill there. That's how he made his living. And Jack and I used to go down to the mill and get up in the top where all the wheat was stored in the mill to be shipped elsewhere, and slide down the wheat. And if you want to get dusty, or a lot of dust in your nose and mouth, that's one way to do it, but we enjoyed it. It was right by the James River.
Yeah, down by I've seen it.
And the James River, well, my dad used to take us swimming there, let us go swimming there. And I'm trying to think, he had a twin brother, Uncle Lindsay. Well, they were very close. They did a lot of things together. And Grandpa would tell us stories every night when we lived in Cliffside, my brother and I. He'd tell us a story like an Uncle Remus story. And he had such an accent, southern accent. And Alfred and Bill Connolly came down to see us for a while, and he used to tell them the stories too. So Alfred, my cousin Al, said to my mother, gee, Aunt Laura, I love the stories Uncle John said. I didn't understand a word he said, but I love the stories.
Yeah, when his southern accent was deep, yeah.
It was deep. Poor Al. He just loved them anyway. They were great cousins.
Yeah, they were great storytellers, though. Grandpa, Uncle Randolph.
Yeah.
Unbelievable storytellers.
That's true. That's very
and
true.
Great, and Uncle Jack, great delivery, great,
Yeah.
What a concept. There's not many people left that can really tell stories like that,
Grandpa told the story, and Uncle Lindsay, how they used to go out and cut up, and all in a big gang of kids. And so Uncle Lindsay wanted to play a trick on everybody. So he didn't tell even his brother. He got to this farmer who had a watermelon patch, and he said, I'm going to bring some guys over. We're going to raid your watermelon patch. He says, I want you to come out, and scare them away. So he gets the kids and says, let's go over there to the farmer's watermelon patch on, say, Saturday night. We'll get the watermelons, okay? Oh, sure, that's fine, fun, So they get over there, and they're in the patch. A farmer comes screaming out with a shotgun and shoots it up in the air, and then Lindsay fell over dead. And everybody ran. Everybody ran out of there so fast to get away from them. They thought they were going to get killed. And one fellow ran clear to Fluvanna and another county. They had to get him back the next day to tell him that it was just a joke. And Uncle Lindsay had played dead and scared the wits out of these guys. And that's the kind of tricks they used to play on each other.
Yeah. Grandpa was quite a trickster too.
And Grandpa was a trickster till the day he died. And even in his funeral, we were waiting for him in Scottsville, and they shipped him to Atlanta. And it's just like him playing hide and seek on us like he did all his life. He was really.
That's funny.
Grandpa was really loved to have fun.
But he showed up late?
Yeah, showed up late for some funeral. And he used to like to sit and pare an apple till it was all.
I remember when I was a kid, it was perfect. Yeah.
Perfectly. So the skin didn't break.
Yeah, the whole thing.
Hold it up, and the apple skin would be round circle.
Yep.
And he would do that, and he just loved to sit in the kitchen at Cleveland Terrace. And he would eat at night. He would go downstairs and eat again. And one night he ate 5 pounds of sugar And nobody could believe it, but that's what he did.
Yeah, that was that sweet tooth.
And he was very good to my grandmother, who, as I said, was crippled. And he would go in every night and play cards with her to make her be happy.
Mm-hmm.
And how many men would do things like that?
Yeah, he was a great man.
We all had to play too. Every kid had to. All of my children had to go in and play cards too, and I had to. But to think that my father would do it too was great.
Hmm. Now, do you have any memories of the old man Jonathan Pitts?
No.
Yeah, I guess he died when you were born.
He died before I.
The year before you were born, he died in 1921.
I only knew of him.
Right.
That he was very old and had gone blind. He was 99 years old, I think, when he died. And apparently he was the first one over from Germany.
Right.
And he evidently came from Munich, the Munich area. I'm not sure, but Aunt Catherine said that. And Papa John was his son, and I remembered Papa John because Papa John used to like to have me come up because even though I didn't talk much, I did a lot of baby talk, and I would wave my hands around and chatter to him. And
yeah, because you must. He was about. He died in 1924, so you were only 2 years old.
No, but it's what he wanted.
But you can remember that far back.
And because he used to hold out a bunch of money in his hand.
Yeah.
Tell me to take what I wanted, and I saw the bright pennies. So he knew I wasn't going to take anything but the pennies. He was safe. But he just took a fancy to me. And so, then I don't know if he died when I was 2 years old. I guess it was.
Or maybe you could have been. Maybe you were 4.
Maybe he could have given me that Shetland pony by having it in a will or something. But I got the Shetland pony when I was 6 from him.
Yeah, I may have the dates wrong on that.
As
So.
a gift from him. But he was a wonderful man. He was a steamboat captain, and he made his money in railroad ties.
Mm-hmm.
And he made a lot of money, and they had a lot of land they gave to the church and to the town.
Even that cemetery was donated by Mother Helen.
Yes.
After he died.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks again, Fief.